Hello and welcome back. I'm really glad you're here. If you have a kiddo or students who struggle with social skills and making and maintaining relationships, and you are aware that this is a challenge for them, one of the most important times in their life is when they also become aware that this is a challenge for them. This can be a really difficult period for parents and teachers and therapists to support kids through. And it might seem a little bit weird to say that it's a really important time, but it requires our kids to have some self-awareness in order to start seeking out support and help and guidance. Before our kiddos get to the point where they become aware that they're struggling with relationships, they're usually not very likely to be receptive to suggestions or support on maybe how they can shift this dynamic. So when our kids start to become aware that this is a challenge for them, it can be a painful process and a painful time, but it's also a really amazing opportunity for us to support them in this new awareness that they have. The number one reason that I hear from parents as to why they register their kiddos for my program at Starfish Social Club is because their kids don't have friends. That's the number one reason. Even if kiddos are a bit socially awkward, maybe a little socially isolated, but they still have other kids or other teens that enjoy being around them, engage with them, it's usually not as big of a problem. It's when we notice that our kids don't, excuse me, have these other people in their life that it really becomes an issue. Sometimes we might have noticed this for months or years. Sometimes our kiddo may be a teenager and we realize they've never really had friends in their life. Sometimes it's when we compare them to other kids, maybe siblings. It's not uncommon for our students to start to notice they don't have friends when they recognize that their brothers or sisters do. So there could be several different factors that come into play that help us recognize that our kiddo is struggling more in this area than other kids seem to be. I have noticed kids as young as 7 start to recognize that other kids don't want to play with them, other kids avoid them. One of the common things I hear is other kids say that they're annoying. That's a really common thing. If you haven't already done so, on my website, starfishsocialclub.org, on the very front page of the website, I have a free quiz that you can take to determine your kiddo's social personality. I divide them into shapes, circles, squares, and triangles. It just might help you understand this conversation a little bit better in terms of your specific child. The kiddos that are triangle kiddos are very likely to be called annoying by other kids. The circles and the squares, not so much. It's not really a thing for them. Triangle kids are also very likely to recognize that they're struggling with peer relationships. They're much more likely to notice that other kids don't like them, don't want to be around them, are talking about them, avoid them, ignore them, etc. So this moment, this opportunity in the life of our kids is actually a really amazing opportunity for us to be able to help, as painful and difficult as it may be for us to witness and experience it through our kids. This is the window in which we can step into with suggestions, all kinds of things to help our kiddos, because this is when they will be the most receptive. If they don't recognize there's a problem, they're not going to be receptive to solutions. The first thing I recommend, if your kiddo comes to you and makes any kind of comment or reference about lack of friends, about how other kids treat them, about noticing that things seem to be easier for other kids socially, any kind of comment or reference that they may make that lets you see that they have some level of insight into the fact that relationships are difficult for them. Anytime anything like this is said, the first suggestion I have is to empathize with them. Regardless of how you perceive the situation, empathize with their perception of the situation. So their perception of the situation may be that nobody likes them. Their perception of the situation may be that other kids are mean or rude to them. Their perception may be that kids will play with everybody else except them. Their perception may be that all the other teenagers have plans on the weekends and they never do. Nobody ever calls them or invites them. Your perception will most likely be similar because you have probably noticed similar things, but with your advanced level of awareness compared to their immature level of awareness. So your perception will most likely be similar. The first thing I suggest is just empathizing with your kiddo, acknowledging what they're saying. You don't have to acknowledge the validity of what they're saying, but acknowledging that this is what they perceive and acknowledging how they're feeling about what they perceive. So you can say something like, yeah, I noticed that that makes you feel really upset, that you feel like other kids don't want to play with you. Or I bet it feels really lonely when you feel like you're the only teenager sitting at home on the weekends. Just validating and acknowledging their experience. What do they notice? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? Just validate and acknowledge that. You may have a bit of a different perception of this. And one example that I want to share is a student that I'm currently working with one-on-one. And when I first started working with him, he told me other kids don't like him. Other kids don't want to play with him. Other kids are annoyed by him. And his mom pointed out that there's somewhere they go once a week. I think maybe it was swim practice or something that they do once a week. And every time they go, there is a child who, when she sees him, she gets really excited and she runs over to talk to him. And so while he and I were having our initial conversation, he was telling me that, he feels like other kids don't like him, don't want to be around him. I validated what he's thinking and how he's feeling and how difficult and uncomfortable and painful that must be to feel that way. I validated everything he was thinking and feeling. And then I asked him about this other child. And I said, your mom mentioned to me that when you guys go to this place and do this thing, there is a girl who always comes over to talk to you. And he thought for a minute and then he acknowledged that that was true. And so I asked him, what do you think that means? What do you think it means that she smiles when she sees you and that she always comes over to talk to you? And he had to think about that for a minute, which helped me recognize that he is not aware of what that might mean. And then he recognized that it means that she likes him and she likes being around him and she likes talking to him. And so once we made that connection, it helped shift his perspective a bit. He may still feel like none of the kids that he sees every day at school like him or want to be around him or want to play with him. And that might be true. But we've now found one example of somebody who does like him and want to be around him. So number one, I've helped him start to recognize the clues that somebody does like you and want to be around you, because he seemed to be pretty oblivious to that. And number two, even having one person that feels that way can really change your perception, your self-esteem, just the way that you view yourself and relationships. So I would recommend this even for any adults who may be listening. If you feel like this is a struggle for you, can you identify one person that really seems to enjoy being around you and talking to you, even if you might not enjoy their company as much? Can you identify one person who seems happy to see you, who enjoys being around you? So that's the first thing I recommend, is empathizing with your kiddo when they are expressing how they feel about relationships. Even if you have a different perception, empathize with their perception, because their perception is very real and very valid. And then after you've empathized with their perception, you can add your own. I try to avoid using the word but, because but means you are kind of devaluing what they said. So I just start it as a completely new topic, a new thought, a new sentence. So the example I gave of my kiddo with the other kiddo who really liked talking to him at swim practice, is I just started a completely different conversation. So I'm not negating anything that he thinks or feels. I'm just adding my own observation without using the word but, because I don't want to negate what he thinks or feels. My next suggestion is to ask your kiddo what they notice that causes them to feel this way. And this will be really helpful for you to get some insight into their level of insight. I often avoid using the word why, because why is very abstract. And a lot of our kiddos who struggle with processing and language and abstract thinking, which is most of our kiddos, have a hard time with why questions. So instead of saying something like, why do you think that? Or why do you feel that way? I'll say something more concrete, like, what have you noticed that causes you to think the other kids don't like you? Or what are you thinking about right now that's making you say that nobody likes you? It makes it much more concrete, and it allows them to pick specific things that are going through their brain to talk about. So what have you noticed? What are you thinking about? What happened today? What questions tend to be much more successful than why questions? And that's in general. That's any conversation that you want to have with your kiddo. If you can ask questions that are not why questions, you'll probably be much more successful in really kind of getting to the core of things. Why questions just tend to be, first of all, they come across as accusatory. Why did you do that? So why questions, unfortunately, tend to have a negative connotation to them. They also are just very abstract. Excuse me. So I much prefer what questions, because they help our kiddos stay focused on what we're talking about instead of getting overwhelmed with the abstractness. So ask them for specifics about what they noticed that caused them to feel that way. They may be focusing on one specific thing that happened that day that was an isolated incident, but they may also have experienced that thing every day for the last 3 weeks. So this will really help us to get an idea of a lot of different things. It will help us to get an idea of what's happening in our kids' social lives and how they're perceiving it. I would also recommend, once your kiddo starts mentioning things like that, touching base with the people in their lives who would have more input into this. If they're in elementary school, their main teacher. If they're in secondary school, maybe a teacher that they really get along with. It could be, if they're in special education, their case manager, a service provider, just somebody who knows your child a little more intimately and would have some insight and suggestions about what they see during the school day. As a parent, in my opinion, it's very difficult for parents to actually know how their child's social interactions go at school because you're not there. And so I think if you're concerned about your child's social interactions at school, the best thing you can do is get input from people who are actually there and who are actually witnessing and observing what's happening. So we talked about empathizing and relating to however your kiddo is feeling and whatever it is that they're saying, empathizing with that, asking them what they've noticed or what they're thinking about that's causing them to think that other kids don't like them, don't want to talk to them, etc. Another question that you can ask is, you can ask your kiddo what they want to do about this. And the reason that I suggest this is because sometimes, and even if you think about yourself, sometimes we recognize that there's something in our life that we don't necessarily want to be that way, and we're not necessarily happy with, but we're also not in a place to be willing to do anything about it at that time. So this could be for you, it could be maybe you are starting to recognize that you're unhappy in your job. Maybe you're starting to recognize that it's something going on at home that's really been bothering you. Maybe it's a health issue. Maybe it's the way that you've been choosing to eat. But just because you recognize that it's a situation you're not super happy with doesn't mean you're always ready to do anything differently. So I think this is really important to recognize, is this something that your kiddo is just beginning to notice, but they aren't really ready to do anything about? Or is this something that's bothering them so much that they are very open to ideas and suggestions and support? I heard one time, this has stuck with me. This was a very long time ago that I heard this, but when it comes to behavior change for anybody, the emotion that has to be felt in order to spur behavior change, intentional behavior change, is the feeling of disgust. And I think that's so interesting. And it's not disgust in yourself, it's disgust in the situation. And I just think that's so interesting. It's such an interesting emotion that it's stronger than just disliking the situation that you're in. It's stronger than being unhappy. It's getting to the point where you are just so tired of being in this situation and you're disgusted with the situation. I've had periods in my life where I was disgusted with myself for allowing myself to be in this situation. But ever since I've heard this, I feel like it's so accurate that you have to feel disgusted with the situation, with yourself sometimes, with the outcome that you're getting before you're willing to do anything differently. And so if we never get to that point in whatever the situation is in our lives, it's probably never going to be different because we are not willing to do anything different. So the same goes for our kiddos. Usually this is triggered by an incident. And even if we think about us in our lives, usually behavior change is triggered by an incident. There's usually not just a time where we're sitting on the couch and just decide we're going to start doing something differently. So for our kiddos, when it comes to relationships, it could be triggered by recognizing that they weren't invited to something. It could be triggered by doing what they feel like will help them make friends and recognizing that it's making things worse. It could be triggered by just an awkward social encounter where they realize they are really struggling with relating to other kids or other teenagers. Usually there's something that happens. Sometimes it's our kids getting in trouble for something they've said or done. So it's usually triggered by something that has happened that has caused them to really recognize that they're struggling socially. In Starfish Social Club, in my program, I actually really recommend that parents not enroll kids and teens if the child is not interested in being in the program. Because if the child is not interested in being in the program, they're going to make it uncomfortable and awkward for everybody. It's a group program. So I frequently get emails from parents who mention that they are really concerned about their child's social relationships, but their child doesn't really seem to notice or seem to care or does not want help. And my suggestion is almost always, please wait. Because if they're not at the point where they recognize they want to do something differently, it's just not going to be productive. But what usually happens is at some point in the future, they're back and now they're ready. Unfortunately, it's usually because something has happened. But as heartbreaking and difficult as it may be for something to have happened to our kids that helps them recognize how much they're struggling, it's actually a great window of opportunity for them to now get help. So often I have kids that will come back a year later, 2 years later, and now they're ready because they recognize how much they're struggling. Whereas a year before, 2 years before, they were pretty oblivious to it. So asking them, getting a sense of what they're willing to do about this situation. What are you willing to do to make this better? Are you willing to, put time into this? Are you willing to put effort into this? And just kind of getting a sense of what level of disgust they have reached, so to speak. Is this something they're just starting to notice and it needs more time for them to really understand what's happening? Or is this something that they already realize is pretty significant and they would like it to be different? Another thing that I want to point out is the difference between fault and responsibility. This is a pretty big concept in the self-help world in general. And it's basically that the things in your life that are happening to you or have happened to you are not always your fault, but they are your responsibility moving forward. So the classic example that is usually used to illustrate this is if you were assaulted or abused by another person. We would never say that that's your fault. Nobody deserves to be assaulted or abused. It's never your fault. It is your responsibility moving forward to figure out what you need to be able to heal from this and to be able to live your life to the best of your ability. It's not your fault that this thing happened. It could be, an illness, a car accident, bankruptcy, a divorce. None of these things are necessarily your fault. Some of them we have zero control over, but it is our responsibility moving forward to figure out how to continue living our lives the best we can in the context of these situations. So about a month ago in a Facebook group that I'm in, A mom made a post. This is a Facebook group for women with ADHD, but so many women with ADHD and autism have kids with ADHD and autism. And so there are often posts in the group about people asking questions about their kids. A woman posted about a month ago and was explaining a situation that was going on with her child and basically saying, he's typical triangle kid, as I referenced earlier. He's aware that other kids don't like him. They don't want to be around him. They don't want to play with him. I think she even mentioned kids calling him annoying, which, that's the number one kind of tagline that I hear. And so she was just asking for suggestions. And when I saw the post, one person had already commented, and the comment was, I actually took a screenshot because I wanted to save this. The comment was, it's not his fault if people think he is annoying. Just teach him other people suck sometimes. Not everyone can think as fast and passionately as us, meaning neurodivergent people. It's not his fault how others treat him. Absolutely, it is not his fault. He is wired the way that he is wired. He shows up in the world the way he shows up in the world. It is not his fault how other people respond and react to him. It is his responsibility if he wants it to be different. It's not his fault that other people find his idiosyncrasies annoying. But if he wants a different outcome, it is his responsibility. And the same as a parent or a teacher, it is our responsibility to help our kiddos, give them tools, give them resources, classes, lessons, opportunities to help them have a different outcome. And if our kiddos are 7 or 10 or 14 and they're struggling socially, they're going to struggle socially when they're 24 and 37 and 49 if things don't change. This is not something that our kiddos age out of. This is not something they mature out of. It actually becomes more pronounced the older they get. Social situations become much more nuanced the older kids get. So if they're not getting it when they're 7, they're definitely not going to get it when they're 12. Also, kids are just expected to know how to get along with other kids. They're just expected to know how to do that. And the older you get, the more so you're expected to just know how to do that. I was actually having an interesting conversation with someone about less than a week ago from when I'm recording this. And he was saying that he feels like the main point of primary education is teaching kids how to get along with each other. And my response to that was that that's not what happens in primary education. In school in general, very little time is actually social. Most of the time is learning. Very little time in school is actually social. If you're in elementary school, you have recess, possibly lunch, depending on the structure of the school. If you're in secondary, you have passing periods and before school and after school and lunch. But all the rest of the time that you're in class is learning time. It's not social time. And the times that are social time, there is nobody teaching anybody how to be social. Lunch and recess and passing periods are when all the adults have their downtime as well. It's when the adults have their lunch and their planning time and their passing periods. There's nobody teaching our kids how to get along with each other. There are people punishing and consequencing our kids for not getting along with each other, but there's nobody teaching them how to get along with each other. So while I agree that there are social opportunities in school and opportunities for kids to learn to work in a group in school, there's nobody actually teaching them how to do that. And so the kids who can figure out how to do that have the opportunity. The kids who cannot figure out how to do that on their own, as the years go on, it just becomes more and more obvious that this kiddo never learned how to function in a group with other kids. But school is not the place where this gets taught or addressed. School is an academic environment. We just happen to be around, 30 kids every hour. So it is not our kiddos' fault if other kids think they're annoying, if other kids don't like them, if other kids don't want to play with them. It's not our fault as their parents or teachers, but it is all of our responsibility to help them and support them. It's kind of like if your kiddo had a physical accident and required therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, because they had had a physical accident. It is not their fault that they were in this accident, but it is their responsibility to go to their therapy sessions and to do what they're being asked to do to make themselves better, to have a better outcome. And it's the same with social. It's not any of our kids' fault if other kids think they're annoying or rude or disrespectful. It's the way that they're wired and the way that they understand the social world. It's not their fault, but it is their responsibility if they want a different outcome to learn how to make different choices. And it's our responsibility as their parents and teachers to support them in that process. So fault and responsibility. I often get asked by parents how to approach social support with their kiddos. So even if they have a kiddo who might be open and ready for some social support, I often get emails from parents that say things like, I don't know how my kid's going to feel about this. Or my kid thinks that everybody else in your groups are going to be, more challenged than they are. And there's not going to be anyone that they're going to want to talk to. How do I talk to my kid about being in a social skills group? Lots of questions about that as well. And so I'll tell you how I do it. I meet with every student before they join the group. So we meet via Zoom, either for group sessions or one-on-one sessions. Anytime a student is going to be working with me, I meet with them ahead of time for a couple reasons. One reason is so that we can build a rapport before they start in the program. So I'm not a complete random stranger. We need to build rapport. And another reason is that I want to be able to get to know them a little bit better and for them to get to know me. And so we start to build a relationship before we actually start working together. And one of the things that I tell almost all the kids, most of the kids who come into my program are aware of their diagnosis. Kids do not have to have a diagnosis to be in my program. My program is open to anybody who's struggling to make and maintain friends. It's geared toward autistic and ADHD and neurodivergent kids, but it is really open to anybody. Most kids who come into my program are already aware of their diagnosis. Some of them are not, and that is not my place. But what I do tell kids is when I'm meeting with them before they begin, I tell them that most of the kids in my program are autistic or have ADHD or have a learning disability or something like that. And then I share that I have ADHD. And one of two things happens. The most common thing that happens is that the kids actually kind of light up by that idea. They recognize that this is a group of kids who are similar to them and that I am similar to them. So the most common response I get is kids are actually kind of excited about that idea. Every once in a while, I'll get a kid who doesn't know that they have one of those diagnoses, and they'll ask me about it, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. And they will recognize that they relate to autism or ADHD, even if they don't know that they have that diagnosis. So I don't think I've ever had a kiddo where I've said that to them and they have kind of been turned off by that, thought, I don't want to be in a group with autistic kids. I don't think I've ever had that happen. It probably happens before kids register for the program. It probably happens, parents have that conversation and then kids say, yeah, I don't want to do that. So it probably happens before they get to me. But there's such a sense of community in my program because we know that we all are here for the same thing. We're all working on similar things. We're all struggling with similar things. As opposed to some programs where our kiddos may be the token kiddo and everybody else is there to quote unquote help them and support them. And really, it's just a bunch of people not teaching our kiddos and not supporting them. They're kind of just allowing and tolerating. It's like peer buddy programs. Not a fan of those, to be honest, because they're not actually teaching and supporting our kids to change their social situation. They're assigning people to our kids who are not real friends. That's an artificial relationship. And usually they're just there to kind of placate our kids. And that does not at all help them improve their social skills or make more friends. Not at all. Okay. So I talked about how social struggles with our kiddos, they're not going away. I actually work one-on-one with people of all ages and worked recently with a student in college, and I could tell that he was trying to implement some things he had been taught that were actually counterproductive. So here he is, 21 years old, very outgoing guy, very successful academically, pretty independent, but really struggling with getting along with other people in college. And it's because he's trying to use these traditional social skills that it's not really how things work. I've, been contacted by parents whose son is 42 and he's really struggling with relationships. I had a conversation several years ago with my brother who had a coworker that was really struggling in the workplace and I think was clearly autistic and really struggling at getting along with other people. As I mentioned, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for women with ADHD, which also have a lot of crossover with autistic women. And I see and hear the same struggles from women in these groups as I see in my kids, in my students. So these things don't go away. They don't get better because we get older. They actually get more difficult as we get older because we are expected to know how to get along with other people the older we are. We're expected to be able to know and do these things already. And things become much more abstract as we get older. If your kiddo approaches this with an I don't care mentality, if your kiddo says, I don't care about not having friends, I don't care that other kids don't like me, I don't care means I really do care, but I've tried so hard for so long to change this situation and it's not working and I don't know what else to do and I'm overwhelmed and frustrated. That's what I don't care means. I believe everybody in the world wants friendships and relationships. Everybody. I don't think there's anybody who truly doesn't care. I do think there are a lot of people who don't know how to make that happen. And it's much easier to say, I don't care, than it is to figure out how to make it happen. And it's not easy and it's not quick. My program is not easy and it's not quick. I had an email recently from a parent asking, if there's an option that's less than 8 weeks. I cannot help your child make friends in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks. I cannot do that because we are talking about the way your child perceives other people, the way that they perceive social interactions, the way that they understand the choices that they make and how that affects their social situation. We're talking about changing the way your child perceives the social world. And that does not happen in 4 hours. It's just not the way that it works. So there are kids and adults who will say that it doesn't really matter. I don't really care. Everybody else cannot like me. That's totally fine. But that's not the truth. That's not reality. And that's not functional. The way that other people feel about you has a huge influence on things like you getting a job and you keeping a job and you having relationships as an adult, whether that's friendships or romantic relationships, even things like housing, things where you may, be in competition, getting a promotion, getting a raise, where you may be competing against other people. It is the people who are deemed to be the friendliest that tend to get the most opportunities. So the mindset that we don't care about what other people think about us is actually pretty damaging. It's pretty damaging to go around in the world pretending like you don't care what other people think about you, because you're missing out on all kinds of opportunities that you would never even think about because you're hard to get along with. Okay. I want to share one more suggestion I have. One of the big responsibilities that we as the adults have in this situation is to help our kids become more self and socially aware. That's our biggest responsibility. And I also know that this is something that most people have no idea how to do. It's a very abstract concept, teaching somebody how to become more socially aware. It's hugely abstract. So I want to share, I've shared this before, but it's my favorite strategy. And I feel like it is the most effective, quickest, easiest thing that we can do to help our kids. If you don't know how to do anything else to help your child socially, this is my number one. And it's what I use with the students as well. 3 steps to this. And I want to preface this by saying that when I talk about it, I often get feedback from neurotypical adults that don't have ADHD or aren't autistic, and they feel like talking to their child this way, or their teen, or their young adult, is a little bit demeaning. And so I'm here to tell you, I have never had a student react in such a way that made me feel like they felt demeaned by this process. I've never had somebody react negatively to me doing this process. And as somebody with ADHD, I wish more people would talk to me this way. And everybody that I talk to about this who is neurodivergent absolutely understands and recognizes the need for communication in this way. So I just want to preface it with that if you feel like communicating with somebody this way is demeaning, I assure you that those of us who need this type of communication, do not perceive it that way. So the first thing that we need to be able to establish is we need to have a neutral demeanor and a neutral tone of voice, because anything can be demeaning if we say it in a certain way, right? Anything can be sarcastic, anything can be rude if we say it in a certain way. So for this process, we're going to have neutral facial expression, neutral tone of voice, just neutral demeanor, so that we are not sending out negative, demeaning messages, because that is not the intent of this at all. 3 steps. The first one is what I call notice. In this context, we're talking about our kiddos recognizing that they don't have friends, or that nobody wants to play with them, or that nobody calls them on the weekends, whatever the case may be. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to notice. Notice means we're making an observation. It's not based on emotion. It's not based on opinion. It's an observation. You may choose to notice how your kiddo is feeling. You may choose to notice what they're sharing. You may even choose to use this in an actual situation where you notice that your kiddo has said or done something that has caused other kids to kind of avoid them. So you can use this however you choose to, and I'll give you examples for each one of those. Let's say you and your kiddo are having a conversation where they're sharing with you that they don't have friends. You can notice, I notice that you seem really sad because you feel like you don't have friends. I noticed that something happened today at school that makes you feel like other kids don't like you. Or in an actual situation, I noticed that someone just said hi to you and you didn't say hi back to them. Right? An actual situation. I noticed that sister asked you how your day was and you didn't ask her a question about her day. Okay, so just noticing, it's just a black and white statement about something you've noticed, something that's objective that you have noticed. The second part of this is wonder. I love the concept of wondering because wondering is very neutral. It's very non-threatening, but it also opens up our minds, the concept of wondering. Okay, so going back to the examples that I was using, for wondering, we are going to just speculate a little bit. We're going to do some speculation. So, for example, I noticed that you are feeling pretty upset about thinking that other kids don't like you. I wonder if you've noticed anybody who does seem to like being around you. Okay, it's just speculation, just throwing something out there. I noticed that something happened at school today and you feel like the other kids think you're annoying. I wonder if they actually think you're annoying or if that's just what you're thinking that they think. Okay, just speculation. So you can make these phrases whatever you want them to be. I noticed that kiddo just said hi to you and you didn't say anything back. I wonder if that makes them think that you don't want to talk to them. So part of the point of the wonder phrase is opening up your kid's mind to see things the way that other people see them. Our kids most of the time would never think that not saying hi back to someone makes them think that we don't like them or don't want to talk to them. But that's what it is. That's what happens. But our kids don't usually think that way. So we're just opening up their mind to being able to perceive things a little bit differently. I wonder if, and I've even done this when kids are upset about something at Starfish Social Club. I noticed that it's really upsetting when game time is over. I wonder if there's something that we could do that would help you transition a little bit easier. I've used this. I noticed that you don't like when he's saying that in the group. I wonder if there's a way you could give him feedback that wouldn't sound so rude. It's just speculation, but you're helping them see this situation from a different perspective. Okay, so that's notice is number one, wonder is number two, and the third one is think. And this one you can use a few different ways. Think can either be At the end of notice and wonder, you can say something like, what do you think about that? Sometimes I've used it in, what do you think might happen if you did that instead? What do you think might happen if tomorrow, and however you want to finish that sentence, what do you think you might want to do about that? So you can use it however you want to. I just love using those 3 types of sentences with those specific words: notice, wonder, and think. They're all very objective. There's nothing personal about any of them. We have a neutral face, a neutral tone of voice. We are just helping our kids see things from a different perspective. And after the end, after notice, wonder, think, you don't even have to stick around. The goal is never to get your child to make a different decision in the moment. The goal is never to change what's happening right now. The goal is to help them start to think differently. So you can even have this conversation, end it with, what do you think? And walk away. Because the goal is just to help them think differently. That's all. That's all the goal is. Okay, so notice, wonder, and think. It's my favorite strategy. It's my best, easiest, most successful way to build social awareness in other students. And I've told this story before, but this is my favorite story. So I'm going to share it again here as I wrap up this episode. Starfish Social Club. If you're new to Starfish Social Club, we were in person for 7 years and then I moved. And so now during the school year, everything we do is on Zoom. We will be in person again in San Antonio, Texas this summer. So check out our website, starfishsocialclub.org, if you'd like to join us in person. Last summer, in our evening groups, I have some students who've been in Starfish for years. Once students are in the program, they can stay for as long as they want to. So I have some students who've been here for years. And I had a group of high school / young adult students that had all been together for at least 3 years at that point. And so during game time, they kind of were in a routine. They would come in, they would kind of gravitate toward each other. They would almost always play Uno, and they would always sit on the floor. Even though there are tables and chairs available, they would sit on the floor. Very friendly kids, very open, very accepting, inviting of other kids. But as you can imagine, when a group of kids gets together and starts doing whatever they're going to do, they're not paying attention to other kids or other groups, right? We all do that. Once we get established, we're focusing on what we're doing. So one week we had a student who had changed his schedule and he was now in this game time with this group of kids as opposed to the game time he had been in. So these kids didn't know him. And he came in and he was about the same age as this particular pod. And I knew that he would do really well with this group, but he came in late. And they were already established. They had already gotten Uno. They were already all sitting on the floor. They were getting ready to start playing. I think one of the girls was dealing the cards out to everybody. And so I noticed him watching them. And I knew that he was worried that if he asked them if he could join, that they would tell him no. I could just, sometimes I can just feel what the kids are feeling. And I could tell that he was worried they would tell him no. And so I said, I notice that it looks like you want to join this group. I wonder if you're thinking about asking them. And I wonder if you're worried they might say no. What do you think? And he kind of nodded. And so I said, I know these kids really well. And I can tell you that if you ask them if you can join, they will say yes. I know that they will say yes. And so I went over with him and he asked if he could join. And of course, the kids, yeah, absolutely. And so, they had no problem with him joining. But then I noticed they were sitting on the floor in a circle and nobody moved. And so there was nowhere for him to join. And I knew they just didn't even think about it. There's nothing malicious. They just didn't think about it. And so he kind of awkwardly looked at me, and then he kind of just like sank down to his knees, but he was outside of the group because there wasn't a physical place for him to go. And the other kids, they just weren't really paying attention. They were chatting, they were, dealing the cards, whatever. And so I stopped them and I said, "Hey guys, I want to tell you what I just noticed." I said, "I just noticed that so and so came in, and one of the kids recognized him from the week before and called him. I was like, 'Hey, it's so and so.' And so I pointed that out. I said, 'I noticed, that so and so came in, and you recognized him, and welcomed him you remembered his name.' And I said, and I noticed that he asked you guys if he could join, and several of you guys said yes. And you even started, dealing cards for him. I noticed that everybody was okay with him joining. But then I noticed, and as I'm saying this, one of the students went, and he physically moved over. So as I'm saying this, he recognized that none of them had moved. I didn't even get to that point in my conversation. He recognized that none of them had moved, and he moved over. And when he moved, the other students recognized what he was doing, and they all started moving so that they could make a place for him to sit. So because I talk to my students like this so often, I didn't even get through all of my wondering and all of my noticing before they recognized what I was pointing out to them. And so that's the beauty of this strategy, is there's nothing right or wrong about what anybody did, but by pointing out to them, kind of walking them through the process, they were able to recognize what happened. And they were able to see that this kiddo, they welcomed him, but then he had nowhere to go. And so this is so much more effective than if I would have just said, "Hey guys, somebody needs to move so that he has somewhere to sit." Right? I very well could have done that. That would have been quick. It would have been easy. It would have taken care of the problem so quick. 2 seconds, problem taken care of. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't build awareness skills in my students. It makes them dependent on someone else always telling them what's happening or what they should be doing. So the notice, wonder, think strategy absolutely takes longer. I do it daily. It's something that I'm constantly doing. It absolutely takes more time and more energy and more effort and more thought and more intentionality. And it absolutely helps our students become more self-aware and more socially aware. 100%. So this is my favorite strategy to use with my students. It's my favorite thing to teach other people to do. And again, the point is not for them to change what they're doing now. The point is for them to think about it so that next time they make a different decision. That's my goal. It's not to change what's happening now. It's to plant the seed so that next time they're able to approach that situation a little more socially aware and possibly make a different decision. Okay, so those are all my suggestions and recommendations for the point in your kiddo's life where they recognize they're struggling with friendships. We talked about empathizing with how they feel, even if you have a different perception than they do. Empathize with how they're feeling because that is their reality. So empathize with what they think and how they feel. Ask them what they notice or what they're thinking about that causes them to feel like this is the case. What do you notice that makes you feel like you don't have friends? What are you thinking about that causes you to think other kids don't like you? What happened today that causes you to think that people think that you're annoying? Okay, so ask them for specifics so that you know what they are paying attention to and being aware of. You can ask them, what do they want to do about it? What are they willing to do about it? And this will be how you can gauge how ready and willing they are for interventions, support, strategies, that kind of thing. They may be very ready. This may be something they've been thinking about for months, or this may be the first day that this has occurred to them and they're not quite ready yet. No matter what, it's totally fine. They are where they are. It is not ever our kids' fault if other kids don't like them. It is not our kids' fault if they have a reputation for being annoying or rude or disrespectful, but it is their responsibility to change it if they want a different outcome. And it is our responsibility as adults to teach and support and guide them in changing that if they want a different outcome. It's not ever their fault, but it is all of our responsibility to try to change it and try to help them have a different outcome. We talked about how social skills deficits do not go away. They actually become more pronounced as our kids get older. We all know adults who are socially awkward. We all do. It might be us, but we all know adults who are socially awkward. It does not go away just because we get older. What typically happens is the older we get, the more reclusive we get if we're socially awkward. Typically, we choose to stop engaging with people so much because we have unsuccessful social interactions over and over and over. If your kiddo says they don't care about what other people think about them, that actually means that they really care, but they've been trying so hard and for so long and not having success. They don't know what to do differently, and they're tired. That's what I don't care means. I am tired. I don't know what else to do. I need help. That's what I don't care means. And then we talked about the notice, wonder, and think strategy. These are all my suggestions and recommendations for how to support your kiddo when they don't have friends. If you are not sure how to teach them and help them and support them on their journey to making friends, that's why I'm here. And I would love to be able to help you help your kiddo do that. So that is my group program at Starfish Social Club. That is what we do in the group program, is we work on being part of a group, getting along with each other, giving and receiving feedback, becoming more socially aware, all kinds of stuff like that in an emotionally safe environment, because we're all here for the same reason. And I also do one-on-one support that could be for kids who are older than 21, which is usually the oldest age that our group goes to. So kids who are older than 21, young adults, older adults. For people who live outside of US time zones, that's another option, is one-on-one support. Or sometimes it's just what kids or parents choose. They just choose one-on-one support instead of the group. So all those are an option. I also have our first module you can purchase as a pre-recorded module instead of a live module with me. It's pre-recorded, but it's all the same content I teach live. So you can purchase that as well. And on the website, starfishsocialclub.org, it will show you all of those options so you can see which one might be best for you. Thank you for being here this week. I am really glad that you're here, and I'll see you again next week.